Okay, how's everyone doing? I know y'all had a long day of learning and interacting and learning more about what the Mississippi Department of Archives and History has to offer your students. So I'm glad to wrap it up and give you a little more added value to this virtual conference, this virtual workshop. So, as was stated, my name is John Spann, and I serve as Curator of Education and Interpretation for the two Mississippi museums. And because things have changed due to the pandemic that has affected all of us, here at the museums, our curatorial staff has tried to be more creative in how we could bring the classroom to the museum or the museum into the classroom. And I know many of you have wanted to bring your students into our spaces and probably have before. A lot of you probably have booked tours here and have seen the whole museum and things like that. And now, because of social distancing rules and things like that, we cannot necessarily do big groups. But there is an option, and that option is booking a virtual field trip through the two Mississippi museums where we can actually bring the museum to your classroom or to your virtual class. So we've actually had some success. We've started this toward the end of October, and we're now moving really right along into this month, and we've got really virtual tours every day of the week, always in the morning. But I think we do have some booked for the afternoon, but every day for November is pretty much booked for virtual tours. And we've seen a great acceptance, and the teachers are very happy and pleased with what we've been able to do. But they are a little bit different than what you would see in a regular tour at the museum. Normally, you would come to the museum and you probably plan about an hour and a half to 2.5 hours to spend in the museum, where you could spend, an hour in the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum and an hour in the Museum of Mississippi History, and switch or something like that, depending on your group. And you'll be able to see all of the museums both museums within that time period. However, with the virtual tours, this is going to be slightly different. Well, you'll be able to still see the museums, but it's going to be more focused. So we actually have allotted tours, or mapped out tours on our website, where you can choose which tour you want. And so they're going to be more focused on a certain topic, ranging from the first peoples of this land to separate is not equal. Or separate, so basically talking about school segregation and integration in Mississippi. And so you'll be able to have a 1-hour tour within this span covering that particular topic. So it may work well with many of you who are studying these topics from Native Americans to the Civil Rights Movement, and you're particularly going over Reconstruction per se, and you want to know what the museum has to say about Reconstruction. Well, the good thing is we have a whole tour laid out for that, and we'll be able to hit the certain standards of the new social studies standards that have been made out by the Mississippi Board of Education. And you'll be able to at least, say that we went to the tour, you did the tour, you were able to hit certain standards using this tour, and get something out of it, an added benefit out of it, besides just coming to the museum and letting your kids go through the museums and then leaving. At least you'll have something focused. There'll be questions, there'll be interaction, besides just going through the museum and just hoping that they're not on their phones wasting their time. So we have a wide range of topics that we'll get into, but I'll start with First Peoples. So the first topic that we offer, or that we have on our website, is First Peoples. And from that name, it's obvious that we're talking about Native Americans of this state particularly. And we have the pleasure of working with the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians as well for this particular lesson. And so what we'll do here in that particular lesson is talk about what we have in the museum. We'll talk about native stories that we share from Nanawoya, the creation story of the Choctaw people of Mississippi, talk about the stereotype vessels that we have on display, talk about mound building and different cultural aspects of Choctaw and Chickasaw and other tribal nations that inhabited this land. And then we'll also move into what happened with European contact and bringing in enslaved people and what happened there with economic and social things changing. And so at the end of our session, which will probably be like 25 to 30 minutes, we'll then pass it over to an elder of the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians to talk more about their particular culture. So we actually did a lesson recently this Thursday, and that was focusing on the culture of Choctaw people. But then we had an elder come on, and she talked about particularly how their heritage is passed on through basket weaving. And so she showed the different weaves and the different baskets that are made and how they make them and how that tradition has been passed on from the past to now, and how young people are doing it and how they're still making how Choctaw people are still making their heritage relevant through art, and that art of basket making and basket weaving. And so we'll have different people coming on to talk about different aspects of Native American culture, not just basket weaving. We may have someone come on and talk about hunting, or talk about dance, or talk about the language and how the language is preserved and passed down. And we also will probably have a chance. We actually did have a chance to converse with the tribal chief of the Choctaw Nation, or Choctaw people in Mississippi, for a program. And so it depending on what we need, we were building a connection with the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians to continue the narrative of their people and showing their stories in the museum. And so some of the standards that we'll hit will be obviously Mississippi Studies and Regions. We'll have, and also U.S. history from 1877 to the present. And then the next we have is Journey to Statehood, which is talking about focusing on Mississippi before it became a state, when it was just the frontier country, to when it was a territory, then to 1817 when Mississippi became a state. So all of that includes cotton being an a major economic backing of the state or this territory, to enslaved people, to connection with Native Americans and Europeans, and all of that bringing up. So with those standards hit will be Mississippi Studies and Regions, and also Mississippi Studies. And so during that particular lesson, we will show, various slides and maps and things of how Mississippi has changed over time, and how Mississippi is now how Mississippi became a state, and where it became a state, and the different territories and treaties, the different treaties that were passed with Native peoples, and the things that were passed to enslave people, and also build economy around the major cash crop of cotton. And then the next one we have is Cotton Kingdom. And Cotton Kingdom is a true focus on enslavement in Mississippi, and how the enslavement of African people helped to drive and boost the cotton production in the state, and how cotton production was the major cash crop from Mississippi from 1790s into 1865. With that particular lesson, we're focusing on not just plantation life, we're focusing on the economics of Mississippi at that time. We're talking about the enslaved people at that time, what they had to go through, what they endured, and then also how we're trying to break down how owning people is sort of like, we're trying to relate chattel slavery to what people know now. It's like owning cattle and things like that, trying to break down what actual chattel slavery was in Mississippi, and how that chattel slavery continued to boost cotton production and push cotton to be the major cash crop of the state. Also, we will go into how people benefited off of this labor. And so the enormous wealth that people gained through slavery, but also how not everybody was a slave owner, right? So we're breaking down yeoman farmers, and how yeoman farmers may have had slaves, but necessarily not just rich planters like you would see in Natchez, Mississippi. And some of the standards that you'll hit will be seventh grade compacted U.S. history exploration to Reconstruction, civics and the world, and then also Mississippi studies. Next, we go through Reconstruction, and some of you may know that Reconstruction is between 1865 and 1877. And so we focus on the different laws and amendments passed during Reconstruction, how people were trying to move through that new time period of coming into new and mass freedom for newly freed people, and also how they were building schools and communities, and also how women were now amassing new changes, and schools and things were built for them, and new laws were passed for women to better themselves in society and become more connected to citizenship. And we also talk about, we kind of put on the pedestal, or not the pedestal, but we put on display the pushback as well to that Reconstruction. So when African Americans gained the right to vote, and then also were being voted into political office in this state, what was going on, what was happening. The new Constitution in 1868, how that not only reinforced and ratified the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments, but it also created the new public school system for Mississippians. But then we also talk about that pushback in 1890 with a change of Constitution. And so why did that happen? What were the things that came into play that that sort of pushed or regressed the progress made by African Americans and other groups during that time of Reconstruction? And in that particular lesson, we covered the standards of Mississippi Studies and Regions, seventh grade compacted U.S. history and exploration to Reconstruction, civics and the world, and then Mississippi Studies, and U.S. history 1877 to the present. We also have a lesson, Mississippians in World War II, where we talk about Mississippians in World War II. And we talk about the different regiments that fought on the front lines during that war, and how Mississippians like Medgar Evers and Charles Evers, after they came back from the war, how they used that experience to catapult them into activism in the civil rights movement. Okay, so we kind of tie that to the civil rights movement just a little bit, but we also focus on the different regiments that fought in the war and that made Mississippi proud during World War II. And the standards that we cover there are Mississippi Studies and Regions, 1817 to the present, and then African American Studies. All right, and next we have Separate is Not Equal, School Segregation. And so here we focus on not just Brown v. Board of Education, but we focus on other major court cases like Alexander v. Holmes that particularly affected Mississippians and Mississippi schools in 1969. We cover how it was before African-American students and white students before Brown v. Board of Education. We show photographs, slides, and things in the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum that help you and your students kind of grasp how students were educated during the 40s and 50s. And we allow you to figure out on your own, was this equal? And we have you break down what the 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson court case determining that separate is equal, was that really true? And so through that lesson, we also talk about the pushback to the Brown v. Board of Education decision with the creation of the Citizens Council in 1954. Also talk about other things that were happening to push back against integration of schools, and how council schools were created to give white parents an alternative to integrating their students. But also the main thing is that we shared that African-American parents weren't just necessarily trying to go to school with white kids. They really just wanted equal resources for their students. And with that being said, the best way to gain equal resources was to integrate. And then also we culminate at the end that even though 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision pushed to change and integrate schools, it didn't fully integrate in Mississippi. They didn't fully integrate in Mississippi until 1969 with the passing, or with the court case of Alexander v. Holmes. And so we go into the Mississippians that made it possible. We don't just share about Martin Luther King and other people outside the state. We focus on people like Gladys Noel Bates. We focus on people like Medgar Evers, who helped James Meredith integrate the University of Mississippi, and also people like Clyde Kennard, who fought to integrate the University of Mississippi, but was not able to, and was actually jailed for just simply applying. So students leaving that program or that tour will learn more about Mississippians that fought for their right for equal education. And with that, we cover the curricular connections of fourth grade Mississippi Studies and Regions, Mississippi Studies, and then the United States History, 1877 to the present. Next, we have Freedom Riders of Mississippi Civil Rights veteran Hezekiah Watkins. So that particular tour is focused on the Freedom Riders and how they came in, how they challenged the Boynton versus Virginia decision in 1961 or 1960. And we talk about that whole ordeal and how James Farmer and the Congress of Federated Organization pushed to challenge that decision and integrating places of interstate bus travel and interstate travel, period. And so what we have is a true understanding of what they were going through, what they actually experienced when they came into Mississippi. And then we had the pleasure of talking with civil rights veteran and the youngest freedom rider ever to be arrested, Mr. Hezekiah Watkins. And so Mr. Hezekiah Watkins is actually in the museum. His picture's in the museum and everything, and we'll be able to show them that. But then also they'll get to hear and talk to a living, breathing civil rights veteran and get his actual experience from him being jailed and how being mistreated as a civil rights veteran. And so with that, we're able to cover the standards of fourth grade Mississippi History and Regions, Mississippi Studies, and U.S. History 1877 to the present. Second to the last, we have Freedom Summer in 1964. So in this particular lesson, we are going through the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum, and we are really focusing on our 5th and 6th gallery of the museum. Like I said, during these tours, we're not really showing you the whole museum. We're showing you a more focused tour. And so we're going through galleries 5, that is talking about activism with young people. And then gallery 6, that's really focusing on the 1964 time period and that whole year, from the Freedom Vote to Freedom Summer to the creation of MFDP, and then finally pushing for the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So that whole thing is going to be focused on that 1 year. And you'll be able to learn more about people like Fannie Lou Hamer, Aaron Henry, Bob Moses, COFO, and SNCC, and other civil rights organizations that young people like your students were probably a part of, or could have been a part of if they were if they were living in the 60s and 70s. And the different standards that we'll hit with this is fourth grade Mississippi Studies and Regions, Mississippi Studies, and United States History 1877 to the present. And then lastly, we have Veterans of the Mississippi Civil Rights Movement, Who Are You? And so this particular lesson is a interaction with staff members like myself and your class, trying to help them in various fun ways learn who these civil rights veterans are. We know that many of them know the national names from Martin Luther King to Jesse Jackson and others, but we're trying to use this particular lesson to help them understand unsung heroes from their particular state. So not even just the men, we're focusing on women and younger people as well, that the people that we do share in the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum. And so they'll be able to, after that particular tour, they'll be able to know more about people who walked in their classrooms, walked in their schools, walked down their streets, lived in their communities and neighborhoods, that made a difference, not just for the civil rights movement of the 60s, but really for their future. And so with that, we'll be covering the standards of fourth grade Mississippi Studies and Regions, Mississippi Studies, and United States History, Reconstruction to the present. So those are the things, those are the different lessons or focus tours that we have. You can actually access them on our website. You can go to mdah.ms.gov and go to teachers and students. And then once you click on teachers and students, there will be a tab that says distance learning. And once you see that distance learning page, you will see all of the different tours that we have to offer. You would click one that you want to learn more about, and then from there you'll be able to sign up online, and then your information and things will be going to Stephanie King, who introduced me, and then that information will also be transferred to our visitor experience of the two Mississippi museums, where we can book your tour, and a staff member like myself or another part of the curatorial staff will be able to do a tour with you. And what will happen during that tour is, like I said, you'll have that tour, you get, let's say you get the Separate But Equal tour. We have a specific lesson that we follow that's focused, that takes you from Brown v. Board of Education, or a little bit before Brown v. Board of Education, to Alexander v. Holmes in 1969. In that particular focus tour, we'll have questions, different interactions and discussion questions, where we'll be interacting with your class. So it's just not us talking to the camera. We want to hear from your students and get them engaged, so they're not just, just looking at us. And at the end, they'll be able to hopefully understand more about that particular topic, and then, obviously get excited about coming to the museum to see the whole thing. But we do leave the class with a few discussion questions where, we can have a discussion on camera through the Zoom, or we could just kind of leave the questions out there for the teacher to continue that conversation in the classroom after y'all leave the Zoom room. So with that being said, I know I'm stationary right now, and you can see that I'm actually in the museum. I'm in the Museum of Mississippi History. If you've never been here before, I'm on the overlook part of the museum. And so even though I'm stationary, what we would do is we would actually move the camera around to different exhibits. We have cameras on dollies and things, and we have it hooked up so that we're mobile. And so we'll have a mobile station moving the camera around the museum so that the students can see the different artifacts and see the different pictures. And then pictures that you can't see well, we already have them integrated into a slideshow. So we would just share our screen and, share a screen, push play or whatever, and your students will be able to see those photographs. And then from there, obviously, we'll have, questions that help them, understand the different photographs or artifacts. So like, what do you see here? What colors do you see? What do you think this was used for? How do you think this bettered their lives? Things like that, like why did they make this poster? What were they trying to say? So things like that will be asked. And typically we have about 40 minutes for a particular tour. We say an hour, but we would like to have it all done by within an hour. So we would have like 40 minutes and then maybe 20 minutes for questions. Or depending on how it's going, we would have, we probably finish in 30 minutes and have 30 minutes for questions, depending on how it's going. But with that being said, that's really like the basis of our virtual field trips. We hope to add more. And if you would like to share, right, like in the chat, some actual focus tours that you would like to see in the future for your students, please do. Things that go along with your class or what you're studying in class, that would be great, a great addition for our education team to build and continue adding value to our digital programming and digital learning edifice. So I'm wrapping up my presentation, but if you have any questions for me, you can please type in the chat. I know some of you probably don't want to talk out loud or unmute yourselves, but if you do want to unmute yourself, go ahead. But if you don't, that's fine. Just please share in the chat. I'd love to talk with you and get you more acclimated to what we do at the museums.
And John, while we wait for people to submit some questions, I'll ask you just a couple about the virtual field trip program. So you mentioned that we currently have 9. There's one more in development. Is that correct?
Yes, there's one more in development. We are working on
the Civil War tour, right?
Yes. We're working on Civil War. It's not up yet. It's not on the website yet, but we're working on Civil War, and I'm actually in front of a gallery called Sense of Duty in the Museum of Mississippi History. And so in this gallery, we talk about all of the wars that Mississippians fought in, from the Revolutionary War all the way to Operation Iraqi Freedom. But we do focus heavily on the Civil War, and we have a lot of artifacts from guns to even a Sherman necktie in the Museum of Mississippi History, where we will be able to really add value to that particular focus tour on the Civil War.
And then two, I know we talked about this a bit the other day, but I think with our friends that chose to join us, we can let them peek behind the curtain a bit. Since we do offer the field trips at set times when a class that a teacher has could attend, but not all of their classes, we're eventually going to work on a operation or a system to circumvent that, correct?
Yes, we are going to do that, trying to make sure that everybody is integrated and able to see and be a part of what we're doing. And the thing about it is, with your classes, I know we had like 75 students in one particular class Thursday, right? And they were all on their computers. None of them were in class. So anything is possible. Anything is possible.
Absolutely. And then possibly with some pre-recording, I know we discussed a little bit as well, where teachers would have a set time when they would have time to view that link in the future. Not there yet, but in the future.
Right. So what I was getting at is, like, sometimes everybody may not be able to make it to that particular Zoom. And so, or, somebody is sick or something like that. And so we will have each of those, hopefully in the future, each of those different focus tours that I mentioned recorded so that we can send it to you, and you can have that to show your class. And we'll have it to where it's only just for your class, and making sure that everybody gets to see it and get some type of value out of it, because you may want to do a quiz or make a test out of the tour, and if everybody didn't see it, then everybody can't take the quiz. And so hopefully we'll get to a point where we can be able to have a good production of each tour so that we could send them out just for your particular class and when you sign up. So if you can't do a live tour on a set time, you can at least have that recording for you and your students.
John, I did see one comment here as soon as that announcement gets through, that there's a question, or at least a suggestion, that they would like to see a potential themed tour around music, literature, and art in the History Museum, because we've got that lovely section on art and lit in the History Museum, so that would be good.
Yeah, that would be good, and I think that may be on the list as well. Like Al said, in the Museum of Mississippi History, we have a whole gallery called Soul of the State that focus on Mississippi's vast reach in the arts, from music to actual, visual arts to writing to plays, Tennessee Williams, and all that. So that will be a very impactful focus tour, and maybe a lesson out of that too, an actual lesson. So.
And I did want to bring up one thing, John. Stephanie King messaged me and said there are a few more of the Band of Choctaw tours available in November. So for anybody that's watching, if you are interested in one of those co-tours with the museum staff as well as the Band of Choctaw Indians, now is the time to reach out to Ms. King and reserve that. And you can reach her. Stephanie, do you just want that at your work email? She's responding. 1 second. She said, sure. So that will be, I'm putting it in the chat now. Stephanie already on top of it. sking@mdah.ms.gov. And she will get you set up. You can also go to the website, and there is a website field trip request button or form that you can fill out as well. But if there are no more questions in the chat, John, thank you for your time. appreciate you letting these people know about the virtual field trips that we have. Hopefully y'all will take advantage of them. I was able to sit in on one of the practice runs. They look great. It's a great opportunity to be able to view the museums from afar. If you're not able to get to us for COVID purposes, or even if it's just a distance issue, but it's still something you want to experience, you now have that available option to you. So with that, we will start to wrap up